So who am I? I started on backs long time ago. And then saw this Linux thing when I was teaching chemistry and physics. I just started out with WSG Pro Linux and everyone knows what that is. If you don't, say again?
Why not FreeBSD?
It didn't come with the book. So, I mean, that was before, I was in rural Minnesota, so we didn't really have access as well as we now. But for my college days, I know what we could do with Unix things. So this was cheap and it worked. And then they disappeared. Hey, now we're right back. Then in 2001, I moved to the University of Iowa, where I was a Linux administrator and was administrator for the Department of Chemistry. A few years ago, I moved over to the central IT group in order to be able to bring up the Puppet infrastructure on campus for different groups to use. Puppet exists on campus in quite a few different places for our HPC clusters, for research areas and things like that. With the central group, we provide Puppet services primarily right now for Linux, but we're also looking at how we can incorporate it with Windows as well in order to be able to try to leverage it a little bit better. In addition to that, I do the Red Hat satellite spacewalk stuff, and I'm doing all the SC. I'm doing SC stuff in conjunction with the team there as well. SC stands for System Center, in case you don't know the Microsoft product. Primarily, I focus on the operations. We're primarily a VMware shop as far as using VMware for virtualization. We're looking at Ruby at this point, trying to figure out how that works and integrates with other systems. So that's where I was at. Oh yeah, I spent a little bit of time in the military. I was with the Minnesota National Guard for over 20 years. I went and did some things. Went to some different places, so doing stuff. So we'll see. Questions? Like I said, feel free to ask as we go. So you may be sitting there wondering, as a beginner going into this, do you really need a Puppet Master? Yes, absolutely, without a doubt. Well, maybe true. Not necessarily. There is something out there called Masterless Puppet, if you haven't seen it yet, where you can run Puppet Apply basically and give it access to your entire set of repositories or manifests for whatever your code looks like. And that can actually work very well. You can start developing it, you can start using it on your servers and your systems. Your nodes just have to have access to those manifests, and they have to have access to those modules, and that's it. And away you go. In a lot of ways, this could be good for starting out with stuff, starting out with using Puppet. But if you have multiple data centers, maybe not. If you're dealing with multiple zones, if you have a lot of configuration churn, where things are changing a lot through a test-driven process or whatever, then maybe Masterless Puppet is not for you, but it is a good way of starting to get involved with it. The downside of Puppet, Masterless Puppet though, is that your machines get access basically to your entire manifest set, all your machines. So if one system gets compromised, they have all your manifests for every server they got, and that may not be a good thing. So that's a big downside, especially if you have a security office that really doesn't like that. Reporting is also limited, but it works. I've been using Masterless Puppet on my own workstation in order to keep it in check with some things, but I'm just now converting it over to a Puppet Master event system as we're bringing our infrastructure. So that it's possible to do. The biggest downfall of Masterless Puppet, though, is the last bullet up here, and that's exported resources. Exported resources are excellent for use within your code base. What it allows a node to do is to tell the rest of the infrastructure some information about itself. Other nodes within the infrastructure can grab that information and then configure itself based on that. So you can have self-configuring Google Docs instead of Google's. So this is getting to the idea of what you'll hear referred to within a lot of the talks about the Puppet as infrastructure as code. Basically coding our systems to bring themselves into compliance with whatever we want to do. And that way nodes can know about other nodes, and you get a nice dynamic environment. Masterless Puppet can't do that. It just doesn't work. So when we're So you may be thinking, that's probably not for me. I probably need to do the I probably need to do the agents server thing. In this case, where you have a master running, and you've probably heard a little bit about that. Can you get by with just a single puppet master? Yes, yes you can. It is not a problem. You can run a single puppet master. Maybe. There are some things to think about as you're going into this. To understand to understand the information flow, in order to be able to figure out if you can get by with a single puppet master, if you have to delve into multiple puppet masters. I'd like to refer to this diagram that comes out from the Puppet Docs, or from Puppet Labs documentation online. And it's a very good breakdown of how an agent actually communicates with the server and also gets information back from the server, and how that information flows. So if you're not familiar with it, we'll step through it real quick. The communication flow in a Puppet master's configuration starts with the agent contacting the Puppet master. When it does that initial contact, it sends along its node name, it sends along all the facts that are developed from Factor to the Puppet master. Now, when the Puppet master receives that, they have to do a few things first before they actually do anything. First, it has to authenticate. Is this an actual node I want to talk to? If it isn't, it tells it to buzz off and then where to go. But if I do know what this node is, then the Puppet master will start going through its nodes and manifests, its modules and manifests, in order to figure out what classes can be compiled to that, can be applied to that node, or what resources I can click on. At this point also, you could also have an external node classifier providing that information as well, which is not in the diagram. We'll talk about external classifiers later. So once it figures out what classes are involved, it then compiles a catalog of information, and it ships that catalog out to the agent. The agent then takes that catalog of information, and it knows how to parse it, to apply the configuration changes, and enforce that onto the system itself. And then you end up with your client state node. So there's a very specific flow of traffic that goes through here. And if you break things in the process, it doesn't work. So when you're dealing with a single Puppet master, all that information is contained onto one system and one system alone. And if you need to know, if you haven't deployed a master yet, the documentation that Puppet Labs has out there is great. It works really well. It's come a long way since when I initially started looking at Puppet, which was the .25 era. And also the Pro Puppet book. It's by Crumbing Company. That is, I don't know if they have it as part of the training for every course, but I believe it's very useful if you get a chance to take some of the training as well. And it goes through step by step on that. But what about Puppet masters? If you're running multiple Puppet masters because you have a lot of nodes, that has to be the holy grail in order to be able to get things out, in order to be able to get your systems compiled or configured correctly out there. Well, yeah, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider prior to doing that. We heard earlier with having a separate Puppet master in a separate data center, and that works great, and that works for that particular situation. When you start getting with multiple Puppet masters, you have to start considering other issues. One of which, hopefully, is on your front and foremost, is are you dealing with virtual servers or are you dealing with physical servers? And the question is still asked. It's still apparent. It's still out there. There are some that I talk to, people that I talk to that believe their Puppet masters should be physical servers and physical servers only, which is fine. It works. I'm on the virtualization side, especially when dealing with multiple Puppet masters, because it gives a lot more flexibility. So if you have a virtualization infrastructure, great, use it. Puppet masters work fine in a virtual environment. If you don't have a virtual environment right now, build one. Maybe you can use Puppet to do it. So what advantages does the virtual infrastructure give us? What we found is that we leverage the redundancy of everything and the resiliency. And like I mentioned before, we're primarily a VMware shop right now. What we found on running out of VMware is that it works very well. We can deploy more systems and scale. We can change the resources of those systems as far as CPU and RAM on the fly as we need to, in order to be able to respond to our ever-changing environment within, however, there's separate discipline administrators that are configuring their system. It provides a lot of flexibility within that for non-central units as well. To give you an idea of what I mean by central and non-central, I work for the central IT group on campus, and there are a lot of other groups on campus that are administrators. Some are running public masters on their own, some of them aren't doing anything, some of them are working with us in order to be able to configure systems. A good example, even though I was an Army guy, is a flotilla of ships. Every ship has their own captain, and they have their own support crew, and they do their own thing. You have to watch out for the guy that's going to ram you, and everything like that. And that's the way it is in the So by having it virtualized, we actually do have a lot greater flexibility in order to be able to provide that. And then also, it gives us a lot of flexibility to test things that roll through upgrades as they come out. 3.5. Hopefully, you guys can get hit by it. We didn't. We're a little bit behind. So with the 3.5 update, there was some big problems that came up there, especially with environments. So it gives you, by having it virtualized, it gives you a lot better flexibility to be able to test it and deploy it. And then there's this piece that you keep on hearing about when you look through their documentation called PuppetDB. PuppetDB, yes, absolutely. You want it. It works. It's beautiful. It's a Java app. Okay, wait a minute. No, it's not. Don't tell me about this. It's a closure that runs inside a Java virtual machine. What PuppetDB does is it uses Postgres as a database backend to store information. What does it store? It stores your most current set of facts for each node. It stores your most current catalog compiled for that node. And out of the box, if you enable it, it stores 14 days of reports with the latest. I haven't looked at it. They just released a new version here a little bit ago before I went on vacation, so I haven't had a chance to look at that. To see what it looks like that adds in some new features. That will be very useful. There's a very robust API, or actually a set of API. I think it's version 3 now of the API, which you can use to query it in order to be able to find information about your environment. And this is information as it's running right now. So you can get a lot of current information, queryable and parsable, out of it in order to be able to find out how your environment is, but also use that information with exported resources in order to reconfigure other things. So if you look through a lot of the literature that's out there, you might hear them referring to something called store configs. Store configs is the old way of doing exported resources. The best demonstration I saw of it, of why you shouldn't use it, was a video that Depog had, which had flaming fire coming out of it. It just couldn't handle the load. And it's very true. With a minimal infrastructure, which we'll be going through here in a little bit, we can do 20. We can basically handle 20 concurrent connections instead, which for us is quite modest. I don't know how large our environments are, but without Puppet, we wouldn't be able to handle that number of current connections at the same time. So how do you know if you need more than one Puppet master? Well, that's always the $50,000 question. There is a document on PuppetLab's site, linked above, that deals with what you should look at as far as what to consider when scaling it to have multiple masters. The first thing is, if you need to scale beyond a certain size, you probably want to use multiple masters. Because if you're in the default configuration where it's where it's getting a configuration every 3 minutes, and that can be quite a bit of load depending on the service. So to spread that load out, you might be able to have a processing power or your virtualization environment to play normal or masters. It could be a geographic or distribution, or maybe it's part of your DR plan. And the last one they add there is administrative modules or political modules. I like political because that's usually what it is, but administrative works as well. The first one, though, is what people usually focus on. And so what does that mean? And you're really not going to find a silver thou shalt have more than one puppet master now. Ideally. I mean, there are too many wheels that we found with running puppet masters that can affect things. How many resources are there for in this? If you have 20,000 resources and you're only using it to, or if you have 20,000 nodes and you're only using it to do 5 resources, to make sure that these things are consistent, you may not need multiple puppet masters. If I was just one. How often are exported resources used? My puppet master infrastructure was working great. All of a sudden, I started getting paged and load spikes and everything. One of the other admins in a different group added in 5 exported resources across all of his nodes, and that started bringing my puppet masters down hard. Load went up, runs started failing. I was just like trying to figure out what was going on, and then I saw in the commits within that was the most recent action, and so I got a hold of him and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And we built the resources virtually, able to handle it, and get it done. So your infrastructure, however you're changing things, can have an effect on it in drastic ways that you wouldn't anticipate. The number of nodes is obvious, but also the time to compile a catalog is important. With some groups, they use Puppet, their catalog runtimes are an hour, just because of the number of resources that they're compiling for that one node, or multiple nodes in that node. Others are very much smaller in time. Others are only like 15 seconds. So if you have a lot of the larger and very few of the smaller, then you're probably going to need to consider that balancing act as well. How often do your runs happen? By default, it's 30 minutes out of the box. So people don't like that. Maybe they want one off. Maybe they want to do it once a day. Once a day is probably a good idea for maybe masters. But that's something. And then also, how are the other groups using it? I mentioned about the exported resources. That particular group was an audio shop, and I think they added in a few check-in cable zones, which started increasing the processing time, increasing what was going on. But you may have something like that kind of environment as well that you may not know of. And then to give you an idea about agent check time, we went through and added a bunch of hosts into our infrastructure using PDSH. PDSH allows you to, in parallel, run SSH sessions across multiple systems simultaneously. And we limited it so that it would only do 10 at a time. So we added a couple hundred nodes at the end. The graph on the left shows the one that's marked there is the third one from the bottom. To give you an idea, that was 72 points in that. And when we did that run, PDSH didn't really do a very good job of spreading out runs. So what we already had in place was a way of randomizing those runs. So that way, if a node gets rebooted, or if it's down for a little while and then comes back up, or if we deploy a whole bunch of new nodes, eventually the randomization factor kicks in. And you can see we kind of get a better flat line of hits that allows you to maintain your infrastructure. You can see we basically went from, when we added that in, we basically went from roughly 25 to 30 calls every 3 minutes to 40 to 60, roughly. So we basically doubled the size of our infrastructure in that one day for the number of nodes that were in. So it was interesting to see it was interesting to watch how the load balancer handled things in front, how the puppet masters handled things, where the choke points were, and if you can add nodes in a controlled way, you can then watch for how your environment is working. So if distributed multiple masters is the Holy Grail, how do the parts match up with how the catalog and the facts and everything is generated? This is a basic diagram, very basic. As you can see, I'm a very good PowerPoint maker. What I have in front is I have a load balancer at the top, and what that does is that does all the authentication and authorization for Puppet calls. It has SSL termination, and the only way a Puppet master gets communicated is through the load balancer. No nodes talk to the Puppet master. I mean, that's just one of the tenets that we have to be able to have the load separated out. You'll see the Puppet master certificate authority is off to the side. We're using the Puppet Labs CA infrastructure in order to be able to handle that. If you're looking at using an external CA, it's supported. And I know people are using it, but I haven't really dabbled in all that. But from what I understand, you can also do that in basic really fine-grained stuff, so you can run a CA offline and then have your infrastructure. So that's one of the things to consider. And then I have just blocks there to represent Puppet masters where the catalogs are defined. Down below, I have a PuppetDB server separated out graphically in order to show that functionality with the database backend. And then off on the side, I put the reporting stuff. Just because we kind of have to have a way of seeing what our infrastructure is doing, and that's where that stuff's goes. So how does this all function? Oh, and I was going to skip this because it was covered very well in the first time, as far as how to get the benefits out to users. So for our load balancer, it's a very minimal load. That's all its functioning is doing. It's one function reader. And like I mentioned, we're with our VMware hosts. They're primarily 385 and 7 gigabytes with the engine proxy. So we're not talking screaming fast. We're not talking super slow. I mean, we're talking really good, solid production hardware. For the CA, I'm running 1 core, 2 gig. Each of the Puppet masters themselves is running 4 cores with 4 gig RAM. The reason why I'm doing that is because I don't have a separate PuppetDB server anymore. One of the very pain points early on with running multiple Puppet masters and having a separate PuppetDB server was that if your PuppetDB server goes down and it can no longer talk to the Postgres database, you cannot generate a catalog. You can't do anything. So that was a very big choke point that had to be accounted for when designing the infrastructure. So by putting the priority on PuppetDB being in the environment, that meant I had to put it with the Puppet master. So that way, if I was updating or patching the Puppet master, it didn't take the whole infrastructure down, which is what it would do if you're dealing with a single PuppetDB server. Now you can do with, you could have multiple PuppetDBs in parallel and assign Puppet masters to separate PuppetDBs. But that, for me at this point, with where our infrastructure was, that was just too much overhead for splitting that load out. So I went the route of putting PuppetDBs on the Puppet masters themselves. And then for the Postgres database backend, well, that's a single server, but PuppetDB now supports not only being able to have a server for read and write, but it also leverages the hot standby capabilities of Postgres. So you can have multiple reads. So if for some reason I start seeing a problem with my Postgres instance, all I have to do is I can just clone that Postgres server, create a hot read, sync them to get replication going between the two. And then PuppetDB can automatically start using that for read only. So if that will help later on, if we get to that point where it chokes out. And the Postgres servers, as you can see, are just 2 core and 8 gig RAM. I didn't really put much about reporting on here. Reporting is always, well, that's very much a lot of ways flavor of the day type of thing. With some shops I see, we're using primarily 2 simultaneously. One is the reporting capabilities of the Foreman. The Foreman is an open source project that's designed for end-to-end client life management set of activities. It's very much going to be, I believe, part of the Red Hat 6 server satellite project, which is and there are a lot of other groups that are using this back end. But the reason I like this is for reporting is out of the box, I can get role-based access control. I can separate out my groups of administrators so that they can only see their own nodes, which is important if that's a concern for them. And for me, I don't care, it's a node, it's a node, it's a node. But for some people, they're their nodes, and they don't want anyone else to see their nodes. So by having that separated out with Inform, we can share a single reporting portal among multiple groups, and maybe later on, as time goes on, leverage some of the other pieces of components integrated with our HN76, and we'll see how that goes. Maybe next year, who knows? We'll dump it all on the opposite. I know it. Say again? Okay, the question was, am I pointing Foreman at the PuppetDB database and pulling the results? No, Foreman doesn't have that integration publicly yet. They're still working on the PuppetDB integration, I believe. The idea behind reporting, when a agent finishes a run, it sends a report back to the Puppet Master. And then the Puppet Master has to decide what to do with it. Well, the Puppet Master's configuration will tell it, okay, we're using one report backend or we're using 10 report backends. It doesn't really matter. But the Puppet Master then takes that report and sends it off to where it needs to go. One of them is a Foreman backend. So it will send that to Foreman, and Foreman will do what it does with that file. Another one is PuppetDB. If you use PuppetDB as a backend, you have to have the PuppetDB terminus on there in order to be able to get that data serialized properly in order to get it stuffed into Postgres. You could have it go to HipChat or to any other IRC chat room thing. So you could have an email every time a Puppet run happens. Why anyone would want to do that, I don't know. That would be quite noisy, but it could be done. So there's a lot of different ways of getting that there. And Foreman, I don't think, can query that directly at this point.
Are you running that on a separate server, or is that running on the box that you got Puppet on?
Okay. The question was, am I running that on am I running the Foreman on a separate server, or is it running on the Puppet Masters themselves? I have the specs later on because it is a separate server. It's a web app though. You could put it on. You could put it on any box and point your scene into it. It wouldn't really matter. If you really wanted to, because Foreman is a stateless application, you could have it pointing to the same database on the back end. Hey, great, Foreman uses Postgres. Don't have to run multiple databases still. So you could have multiple sets of Foreman and running, and then just go in through your load balancers for that as well. So you can scale Foreman if you need to. I haven't had to need to. I hope I don't. The other neat thing about the Foreman using that as a front end is out of the box it starts generating nice graphical statistics for managers so they can see what's going on if they ask. If not, you know what's wrong. You say, hey, look at this, what we're doing right. So this is, you can look at operating system. Basically any fact that Factor can report on, Foreman can generate a trend chart for it and give you a snapshot of what's happening in your environment. So if you need to know right now how many Linux servers you have, as long as they're on and running, you can give that answer. And we know if they're on and running based on the statistics of the run. Right, so it gives a very nice snapshot of what's going on right now. And it looks the green. Usually after lunch, or just before, usually after lunch, I start seeing it turn. I'm very colorblind, so I'm assuming it is green. If it isn't, please let me know. But after lunch, a lot of times I will see hosts that perform modifications of other. And usually I'll see about half of the full amount, because then I know one of the other groups did a change across their entire infrastructure in order to be able to see what's going on. So I can see in a snapshot how busy the environment is with churn at that particular point in time. The one issue I have with Foreman is that it really doesn't give me real time. You have to keep on refreshing in order to see what's going on. And it'd be great if it would be great if there was some better real-time aspect to it. Right now there isn't. So that's what I use Puppet Dashboard for. Puppet Dashboard is another open source project that you can use, and there's quite a few Puppet Dashboards out there that people have written. This is the one that used to be underneath the Puppet Labs repository control. Now it's underneath Soderbergh's. I'm sorry. But it's worked on by the open source community. I stole this picture from Reddit. You can see here it gives you some very similar information to the Foreman, where as far as the number of reports, as far as the number of nodes that have changed, ones that haven't changed, ones that have failed to narrow it out, so we might need to integrate it out. But the very nice thing that I like is that little button that you can barely see in the upper right corner. Enable auto refresh. So it's just spinning. I have it watching, and it's just spinning, and it just keeps on spinning. And when I start seeing a lot of brown, I'm assuming it's brown, for the errors, I know there's something going on. Either something's wrong with my Puppet Masters, or something's wrong because they did a bad commit. And this way I can keep on top of it better during the workday in order to be able to see what's going on. So using these two tools in tandem has been very key for me as far as running multiple Puppet Masters in order to be able to see, keep the environment stable. All right, so for reporting, the question from before, Foreman and Dashboard, they both, Dashboard 2.0 beta, uses Postgres as a backend. So I use the same Postgres instance to run two databases inside of that one instance, one for Foreman, one for Dashboard. If you are running the version 1 series of Puppet Dashboard, you have to run MySQL because it uses a MySQL database. If you're using MySQL, because it's using INMLDB tables. Yeah. If you leave it churning and you forget, you're going to come back to a crash database, and you have to dump it and reload. So that's one of the downsides of using version 1 Puppet Dashboard. Version 2 beta, it works. Don't be afraid of the beta. People are using it in production. The Foreman web frontend is 2 cores, 4 gig of RAM. The Dashboard frontend is 2 cores, 8 gigs of RAM. The reason why the Dashboard one is a little bit bigger is because Dashboard integrates with PuppetDB in order to be able to get access to PuppetDB's inventory service. So on my Dashboard server, I'm actually running a Puppet Master with the PuppetDB terminals to get that information. Can't access that Puppet Master from anywhere else. It doesn't do anything. It's just serving as a service to Puppet Dashboard in order to be able to get access to the inventory service. So it's a little bit beefier than the other. Like I said, your mileage may vary on any of these specs. How many nodes do I have right now? Well, you saw on the one that was what, 466, I think it was this morning. We're looking at adding another 800-ish here over the next few months. So it's working fine with that. The biggest benefit I have right now for running the multiple Puppet Masters is patching. I can take my load balancer, force all the traffic to one, patch, bring that one back up, force it over, patch, and go. So I don't have any outage for the individuals using them in order to be able to put that catalog and configuration to their systems. Like I said, depending on the earlier one, and you never. So when you're running Puppet Master infrastructures, you have your LB you have your load balancers splitting things across. You need to make sure you get your certificate revocation list out to the puppet masters appropriately, because when you have multiple masters and multiple groups, things can get revoked, nodes can get reinstalled, they forget to keep their certificates. You need to make sure you keep that in sync. And then, as I mentioned before, all the reports are forwarded to both of them. When you're running multiple puppet masters though, you have to watch out for your file bucket. We're currently doing a file bucket over NFS in order so that it's shared across all the puppet masters. Because you can get a request coming in from one direction one time and another direction a different time, and it may not actually have that file. So that helps. Do you need choke points? We've talked about most of the choke points already. As far as correcting it, load balancer in front is a big one. One of the things that can help with that is that you don't really need to have a load balancer in front of that to balance it. You can use round robin in front of multiple load balancers or things along those lines. Or if you have an F5, you can do that. Some people, there's some documentation online that allows you to do that. You can have DNS serve records, SRD records out there, in order to be able to segment it between clusters of puppet masters. And the big thing that I'm working on right now is Puppet as a service. I mean, it works great for getting stuff out to the systems. How do you report it? PuppetDB, it's like the Three Musketeers, all for one and one for all. I mean, you use PuppetDB, you get access to every single report, every single fact of every single node within that database. From any node. Doesn't work very well with the hotel model, where some people want to beam their own ship. So that's a problem. No RBAC coming on back outside for PuppetDB. That's an interesting task. Otherwise, working just getting information out to the nodes, it works great. Questions? Comments? I used to teach at Catholic school, minor relations. Yeah.
Not very familiar with PuppetDB, but as a document, you were running it on each of your Puppet masters. So how does that work if you have a Puppet master?
That is what I'm working on right now. The question was, how do you handle if running multiple Puppet DB instances if you have multiple Puppet masters? That is a great question. That's what I'm working on. The reason why is because we split things out by environments. So I basically have to try to separate environments out in their own PuppetDB set, which I can do, and I've done. And I think I got the reporting figured out. And then they changed PuppetDB now, so you can actually hook your PuppetDB instance now underneath a different URL. So I think now I have my RBAC if I can proxy that properly in front, but I don't know. Because that was the latest and greatest release of PuppetDB. So I don't know if that will work or not. If it does, it will simplify a lot of things. If it doesn't, it's still painful. There was another, yeah. Okay, HA, the question was HA for the Postgres database. At the current time right now, for PuppetDB, we're not really doing anything for that. It's stateful information right now if it crashes in. But we do have backups. We do have a backup regime in place, so that way we could roll back if we needed to if for some reason the database got corrupted. It's all on VMware, so we have the HA capabilities of that. We have all of our data stores are NFS snapshotted, so we have capabilities there. So it is quite nice that way. We just haven't split it out into the master. We just haven't split it out into a hot stand like that. Like I mentioned before, with PuppetDB, that's nothing compared to what format and dashboard and the reporting aspect. And back.
You might have gone through it, but can two Puppet masters write to a MySQL database simultaneously, hosted on a tertiary machine?
Okay. The question was, can two Puppet masters
Write to a PuppetDB database.
Oh, can two PuppetDB write
into a single PuppetDB?
Can a single PuppetDB write
2 Puppet Masters to a single PuppetDB.
Can 2 Puppet Masters run to a single PuppetDB?
Yes.
On a third machine?
Yes.
Not a problem.
Okay. You also mentioned quickly, you said it was a file bucket that you were sharing via NFS.
Yes.
What was the share being done for?
Okay. The question was, why are we sharing the file bucket over the NFS? You can only have one file bucket for a Puppet Master infrastructure to have a complete set of everything. What happens with the load balancer is it separates all those requests from the same run across all the servers simultaneously that you're load balancing. So if the push request for the file that you're bucketing is on one server and a get request happens on a different server, they have to have that shared. So the only way, the easiest way we did what that was with an NFS share over NetApp. But it doesn't have to be NetApp, it can just be any of the tertiary machine bringing an NFS server.
You have multiple Puppet Masters to deploy different types of servers. You don't need to run a Puppet Master today,
Okay. The question was, do we use multiple Puppet Masters to deploy different systems? Yes. I have both Linux and Windows systems running on there right now. We haven't looked at AIX, but it's supported. Also, I've been playing around with systems. Nope, it's all one set.
So they all have to share the same.
No. I can talk more about that later offline because I think she's going to take the
Yes,
conversation.
right. We'll look out.